So this interview is for the Split This Rock blog for our festival coming up in 2016, right around the corner. And we're so happy to have you featuring at the festival.
Yeah, thank
it's
you.
wonderful, yes. So I want to start with a question about love. You said that you, in your writing, you're expressing a wild. Tell me what a wild love is, and maybe talk about how we enact love in poems and why that's important to do.
I think that idea of like wild love is like, just sort of being wild and, unabashed in our expression of what we adore and care about and want to exist in the world in a way, Often our default mode, which is a necessary mode, it seems to me, is like critique, So going through our lives with critique. And there feels to me to be something like really, really, really important. More equally important, if not more important, in what critique needs to do is to show what needs correcting, and what love or celebration, in my idea, or what I think right now, what love needs to do is to show what needs preserving, So there's something about that. So. Not to mention, it just feels good to like go through the world reminding yourself and other people of like how goddamn beautiful things can be, and to enact it in poems. How do we do that? I don't know. You stumble into it. I don't know. But I do feel like it's simple, and it's like the practice of gratitude or the practice of life. I like to ask students when I go around in classes, like, what do you love? What do you love? Like, my buddy Patrick Rosal, he has a poem where he talks about this, I think it's a Tagalog word that basically means a kind of, you love something or someone so much that you want to hug it so hard that it puts you and the other person in risk of bodily harm. And I love to ask people, like, what is the thing, And be like, and just sit still. Like, let's really think of the things that you love so much that you could squeeze them,
Do you think that's hard for people to think of?
Oh my God, of course. Totally. Because that's not what, I feel like that's not a lot of what, I don't know if this is like, my experience or my feeling is that that's not a lot of what we do. It's a discipline that I need to like practice so that I don't, simply go through the world saying what is wrong, It's hard to do. It's hard to do.
I think the messages out there for us are to look at it that way too.
Yeah, totally. Totally, yeah.
So when you keep getting inundated with that,
yeah.
like, this is what's wrong with everything you see,
right.
It's hard to see what's right with it.
Yeah.
But maybe that's a job of poets.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think it is. Like, teaching or modeling or something in how to see, I think that's the good work of anyone, we can all do that in various ways, I think.
So I do have to ask you a gardening question.
Yeah, good.
I'm sure you've never been asked about gardening and poetry or not. But I am interested, particularly in like thinking about the period of time that we're in right now.
Yeah.
So if we think about the garden as, it's a continual process of life.
Yeah.
And the writing process, has that cycle to it too, and there are times when it feels sort of less productive or stalled.
Yeah.
And I think of winter maybe being that way, or at least from what I can see. So I'm interested from you, what's happening sort of under the surface right now in the garden? In your garden, what's going on that might help us think differently about those times when we don't feel like much is happening?
Totally, yeah. I can actually tell you what I just did this morning in my garden. So I'm actually not living in town for some months, so I just came back. But part of the reason I had to come back was to do a little work in my garden. And what I did was, so I had these two little mini dwarf apple trees that are lovely, and they're not very productive, and they take up a lot of space that needs to be used in other ways. So I had this other apple tree. It's called an Arkansas Black, and it's it's what's called a triploid. It requires 2 other trees to pollinize it. So, whereas most trees, usually 2 trees will be enough. This requires 3. So, I'm gonna graft. I took little cuttings of 2 trees that I cut down. They're 2 different kinds of trees, and they'll both work on this Arkansas black. So I took cuttings and I put them in the refrigerator, and then I'm gonna graft them onto this Arkansas black tree. So I'm gonna take a part of this tree that I cut down to make space and stick it onto another tree. It's crazy, right? And then,
That's awesome.
right, and then that will help that tree get pollinated. And it'll help me with space in the garden, so I'll be able to put other things in there. The wood from the apple trees, which was sad to take down a little bit, they've been with me for 5 years. That'll become nourishment for other things in the garden. I'll chop it up. And I'll have space for this other sort of thing. So that's stuff that can go on in a garden in the winter, right? It's making space, it's rearranging, it's sort of like, you can't see, all it is sticks. Like the thing I cut with this morning, it's just sticks, but it's going to become fruit. And it's going to make this Arkansas black tree able to produce its fruit, So that's, I think that's a kind of lovely metaphor to me, that I won't parse out. I'll just say that's a metaphor. The other thing is that, like trees are sort of, sucking their energy, the roots are getting nourished, like everything sort of retreats, it does not die, it retreats. Under the soil, a soil biologist or someone could tell you like what's really, really happening. Stuff's happening. A lot of stuff is happening, There's all kinds of magic going on. And there are all of these sort of, things are breaking down, things are sort of, things are being nourished, things are being fed. There's also like, on the exterior, there's a kind of quieting, So a garden can look, I think to your question, points to this, can look like a dead space in the winter. But it's really not at all, There's like so much activity. And I mean, so to me, what's so beautiful about gardening or orcharding, all these things, farming, is that you're always sort of in the process of seeing things into the future. So a tree that looks like a dead tree is in fact a tree with apples on it. The seeds that you're ordering are in fact lots of plates of whatever you want them to be, kale or carrots or collards or whatever, It's such a beautiful like training in metaphor. But
it's hard to see that though.
That's
the
right.
training, right?
That's right.
Being able to see the possibility. That this is a moment of possibility.
That's right. Yeah. So it's like So I'll tell you something that is also useful. The more I'm gardening, the more I feel comfortable with dying. Because I understand something about what looks to be empty, quiet, something is rich. So there's something about cycles that I understand, and there's something about as we generate, I think work, like poetic work or something. Like we understand that if you're working in a garden, you understand that there's a kind of dormancy. There's a kind of quiet time that springs forth this other thing. But I feel that very much. When I'm in a garden, I understand like cycles a lot more deeply in my body.
I'm gonna work on that. I can think of one other question.
Do it.
And that is, as we talked about gardening, I mean, and you light up as you talk about gardening.
I know, it's a little crazy.
No, it's wonderful. Is there anything else that consumes you in that way that shows up in your work, that ends up in your work because it has to?
I feel like, like my relationships are, so people, like family, friends, etc., show up in poems in a way that feels different than, but when I think about a lot of these poems, it's like I'm often like sort of thinking about people that I love, Um, so, you know, and like the fig tree poem, for instance, that poem is so much about people relating, right?
Yeah.
And it's also about my buddy Jay's dad, who like gave me figs, you know, and whose figs grow in the Bloomington Community Orchard, you know, and around because there's cuttings from it. So that's very much a poem about this guy, you know, my buddy's father. I see that a lot. It's like so much interested in like these people who I love.
Does it start there? Does it start with the relationships, or does it start by thinking about?
I think sometimes it does. In this book, sometimes it does, but sometimes I feel like some of the engine of the poems is like being like just so sort of like fired up about a beautiful occasion, you know, a beautiful event, you know. The fig tree poem being an example of like we're just like here looking up into the fig tree, or some of the other poems. It feels like it is the garden is a real sort of it might be like it's such a rich way to sort of be transported, you know. Yeah, that's what it is. It's a rich way to be transported.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
wonderful.
Yeah.